Obviously, coronavirus is the global concern. Last week we saw basically the entire gains of the past 12 months on stock markets slowly get eaten away, and we are now basically where we were 12 months ago. Now, you know that I like Donald Trump, but I think that coronavirus is going to potentially be the first genuine hurdle that he's going to have to handle to be able to get to re-election. But we'll get to that later. That's politics. Let's talk about life and death. These are the numbers that have come out from Johns Hopkins University about how many people have coronavirus, and it was updated just today. More than 2 football stadiums, 86,000 people, almost 3,000 people have died so far. Most of those deaths have not just taken place in China, but we are now starting to see an awful lot of people dying in places like Iran and France. Now, that is the total number of people who have contracted coronavirus since the whole thing started a few weeks ago. This is how many people have it now. You can see there is not a huge difference in those two maps. But we're seeing, particularly with Iran and Italy, major problems for the rest of the world. Because, of course, there is so much transcontinental tourism and travel in and around Europe. The movements from the Middle East and from China to the Middle East and then from the Middle East to all sorts of places around the world mean that Australia has now got to a position where we have now introduced another travel ban. Unless you are an Australian citizen, you cannot fly from China to Australia. That'll be the case for another week. You now cannot fly from Iran to Australia for at least the next 2 weeks. The Health Minister, Greg Hunt, had this to say today.
No, we are one of the world's leading nations on this. We've acted early, we've acted hard, and we've acted decisively. I know there has been some criticism that we may have acted too early on that front. I think the affirmation today is that in acting early, we have been ahead of the curve.
And isn't this exactly where you would want our island nation to be, ahead of the curve? That said, the Chief Medical Officer says that's probably it for travel bans. Even though France is becoming the problem, Italy is well and truly a problem right now, is that at some point you can't cut Australia off from the rest of the world. Well, I wouldn't be taking those options off the table. Now, these people know way more than I do, but they are starting to say there's only so many times we can do a travel ban. Well, I say, if there are as many cases as there are around the world, and we've just shown you the map that shows in Asia, in Europe, and now into the very northern tips of Africa, this thing is starting to move. We know that just yesterday we found out that somebody who had come back from Iran was working at a beauty shop on the Gold Coast and may well have infected up to 40 people before they went to hospital. Now, it's good that we've closed the borders from the 2 hotspots, but why not others? We'll wait and see where this week goes. That said, as worrying as this virus may well be, some people are already getting a little bit silly here in Australia. Yes, I know I've just led the show with it, and yes, we talk about it most nights, but how can you not? Now, I know that they want to compare it to the flu, but we don't know how bad this is. There is no vaccine. There is no traditional way of treating this thing. We don't know whether it's 14 days or 21 days or maybe even 30 days incubation period. The best informed guess at the moment is that it's 14 days. But this is the scene that we are starting to see in Australian supermarkets. If you go anywhere near social media, you can see that Coles, Woolies, Aldi and, well, many others have stories like this, where people are starting to stock up. Now, I get why people are concerned, I get why people are worried, but I don't think you have to be this worried in Australia right now. I don't think you need to be stocking up on long life milk, and I don't think you need to be getting a year's worth of toilet paper, just yet anyway. But there is some good news that's happened over the past weekend, which is that while Australia is trying to do its best to get towards a vaccine, it looks like the great brains in Israel look like they may well get there first. And in fact, it could only be weeks away. Now, let's imagine they get there in the next month. The problem is, of course, you have to not just find it, make it work, do all the testings, but then you have to start mass producing. And when there is 86,000 cases that no doubt in a few weeks' time you'd have to assume is going to be over 100,000. The need to then get a couple of 100,000 more for everyone who starts to get it means the process of distributing that drug as fast as possible, who pays for it, what's the cost, what's the reverse on the research and development, that'll all be fascinating. But what will also be interesting is if somebody is, say, in the Inner West Council in Sydney, that's the old Marrickville Council, will they put their hand out for this Israeli-made vaccine? You see, 10 years ago, as part of the boycott and divestment strategy, the BDS, basically, to ban, to divest and to sanction Israel because they believe them to be the oppressive state, holding Palestinians back, they have said that just like they used to back in the 80s, no nukes, they've said no to Israeli products. It cost about 10 years ago about $3.5 million for the ratepayers of that inner city woke council in Sydney to pull up the drawbridge between Leichhardt and Tel Aviv. Apparently there was one. It'd be interesting to know if the vaccine does come from Israel, will BDS still apply in those oh-so-woke areas? Of course not.